You may not pay your bills because A, you're forgetting about your bills, and that's one thing. The other one could be because you have an executive function problems and you cannot figure out how to pay your bill. Or they may be saying, hey, hand me that thing over there. That thing to scoop things out instead of, saying, hey, hand me over the spoon. She saw that her mother had made 3 checks for some sweepstakes company in the Bahamas for almost $1 million. Welcome, everyone, to the Dementia Doc podcast. I am Dr. Miguel Rivera, and I am joined by my wife, Ganga. And today we are going to talk about the top 5 warning signs that this may be Alzheimer's disease.
When we were discussing this conversation, we thought, what are the key things that we all need to be aware and to notice in our friends, family members? And if we notice them, to understand, that is a red flag, and maybe it's time to go get checked. And Miguel, why is that important? Why do we need to know warning signs?
Well, I think that you just said it, that if we are aware of what the warning signs are, then we can reach out and we can get checked out. And this is so important because, there are what are called reversible causes of dementia, which is, a big part of, what I do, and also what the job of a neurologist or psychiatrist that you see for dementia would do. So, for example, part of this reversible causes of dementia is something called normal pressure hydrocephalus, which is when there is an accumulation of the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain. Also, vitamin deficiencies, things like low vitamin B12, low vitamin D. It can be thyroid problems. It could be electrolyte imbalances. It could be things like anticholinergic drugs and other types of medications that can affect cognition. It can be severe depression presenting as pseudo dementia or false dementia. So, it could be a brain tumor, So there are so many things that under ideal circumstances would get ruled out before we make a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. And I think that is the main take home message here is, we're going to discuss what the typical warning signs are, a little bit perhaps how this maybe differentiates from normal aging. And hopefully that information will give you the guidance that you need to reach out and get some help.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point because when we hear about dementia, Alzheimer's disease, those diagnoses are so scary that I think we may tend to overlook and just to say, nah, why worry? Or some may think, why would I act on this if there is no cure? Like, okay, if I have it, whatever. But to know that there are actually many things that may not be that, they may be pointing to that, but they're reversible. It's so, so important. So with that, we're going to speak only about Alzheimer's disease, not other dementias, because there is something specific to Alzheimer's disease. Miguel, what is the number one warning sign?
Okay, so before I answer that question, so Alzheimer's disease is considered an amnestic dementia. So a type of dementia that presents with amnesia, forgetfulness, cannot remember our past. So Alzheimer's disease, one of the most common presenting symptoms, if not the most common really, is memory problems. But not just memory problems, but memory problems that begin to disrupt daily life. Dementia, by definition, these symptoms must be severe enough that they affect the person's functioning. So, like when we think about memory problems as we age, for example, forget to take our vitamins, forgetting to, like you go into a room and then you're like, oh, what was that? What am I here for? You can't find your keys, you can't find your cell phone. These are things that happen to each and every one of us. The problem is when this becomes more of a pattern rather than an occasional occurrence. And when it becomes more of a pattern, then does this pattern then begin to disrupt the person's ability to live their life independent?
Will also the personality type play a role? Like, for example, we often laugh that I forget where I place my phone. It's like how many times I go into my iCloud and play the sound from my phone. Now, if someone sees me and they don't know me and they think, oh, she does not remember where she placed her phone, is that a sign? How do you look at that? For example, I'm misplacing my phone. With the car keys, I have to think I put them in one place all the time. I don't have that issue. With my phone, for sure.
Yes. We are frequently going around the house trying to find Ganga's phone,
If you have the
for
same
sure.
issue, iCloud has this thing that you can go and play the sound to locate your phone. Super helpful.
So, yeah, so that brings an important point, which is uh, the operant word is change. So, if a person has been a little bit spacey, frequently misplacing things all through their lives, then it's probably less of a problem that they continue to do those things as they get older. The big thing I would say is that there has been a change. There has been a change that is disrupting the normal activities, the normal flow, the normal life of the particular person. So there's been a change, let's say, from a prior level of functioning that is now moving into a lower level of being able to function.
So, for example, if you continue to take me as an example, I'm very good at remembering appointments. Yeah, place them on the calendar, but in general, I don't have, oh shit, this happens. Like, I'm very good at keeping track on that. If all of a sudden you see a change that there's 1 week that I forgot some appointments, another week I forgot the appointments, would that be the change that you would think, wait, something is off?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like, for example, um, and here the words are perhaps occasional. Like, if you occasionally do what the rest of us do, which is that you may miss an appointment or forgot that you had something planned. If that is something that is happening sometimes, if it's happening occasionally, it's not such a problem. More of a problem would be, for example, beginning to forget to take your medications, beginning to beginning to forget recently learned information, which can lead, for example, to the person asking questions, let's say multiple times, because they cannot really retain the information that they just recently heard. So, problems, for example, with paying bills, being late for paying bills. Like I just saw a patient for a capacity evaluation who had forgotten to pay her taxes for 2 years. And so they had to go through great efforts to try to get the IRS on board, and letters and different things had to be done so that they wouldn't penalize her for this reason. So, you know, and these were things like more pervasive things that were happening. So it's not just occasionally having a mental lapse or forgetting a particular appointment, but actually something that it's becoming more of a pattern, that it's happening more frequently and it's not getting better.
Mm-hmm. Let's say if a person missed email from an accountant or IRS and they're like, oh, I didn't think about this. There was time to pay taxes. And that wouldn't be the sign of Alzheimer's disease unless they completely forgot about this. And then if they reminded, they still forgot about this. And And it's not like that. Like maybe there's somebody who doesn't care about paying taxes, and like I don't know, maybe there is somebody, and you think the family members needs to always nudge them to pay taxes on time, but it's a person who was always on time with things. And all of a sudden, she completely forgot that there is even such a thing as paying taxes for 2 consecutive years.
Exactly. So there's been a change. And actually, you mentioned something about family that reminded me of something. Like, in addition to this pattern now of forgetting things, like forgetting to take your medications, forgetting to keep appointments, um, what many times people do is that they begin to write themselves little notes. And I have been to people's houses where there have been hundreds of post-it notes all over the place, where the families tell me, if we don't remind, my mom or my dad to do something, they just won't do it. Also, now with the fact that we can put things on our phone, many people with endless reminders, endless alarms on their phones. So they can also be a warning sound. If you see that all of a sudden there are a multiplicity of little sticky notes all over the house, or a, a complete dependency on using the phone for reminders and appointments and things like that, because without that, they would not be able to function.
And again, I think that still signifies a change, or right now there's way too many of them. It's not that, let's say, if your mom likes to write herself little lists and she's always liked doing this, she has them on her fridge, that's just something she does. But all of a sudden, if there are a ton of those everywhere, clearly pointing that she may not be remembering. Like, let's say you don't live with her, you came to visit, and all of a sudden there's sticky notes everywhere.
Yes.
Like, that's probably about ding, 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 something is
Yes.
off. Okay.
Totally. Yeah, definitely worth investigating. And again, we come back. You appropriately reminded us that it's about change. It's about changing from the previous level of functioning to a lower level of functioning.
Okay. So, what is number two?
I think that number two would be changes in like being disoriented to place and time. And these frequently happen together with memory because one of the first areas of the brain that get affected uh, for people with Alzheimer's disease is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is, I mean, it does many things, but uh, it definitely has a big role in the deposition of new memories, in the deposition and retrieval of new memories. And it also has in its functions orientation to place and time. So as the memories change and or the memories, the capacity for short-term memory begins to get affected, then also the problems with the relationship to time and space changes. For example, people may get confused and disoriented. Like I've had people that the presenting symptom has been that they're waking up in the middle of the night and getting ready because they think that it's time to go to work.
Mm.
Also, like not knowing where they are, like getting lost in familiar environments, being disoriented to, being in their actual city, their actual state, being in their home. So these things can definitely deteriorate and they can many times be an accompanying presenting symptom to memory loss.
Mm. And again, I think we need to point that it's all about the change.
Hmm.
And the example that comes to my mind is first to be able to relate how people feel and to just empathize when something like that is happening. I remember being in Germany and we traveled to a few countries. We changed time zones, and I remember I woke up in the middle in the morning, but I had no clue where I am. Like there was
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
couple of minutes that I was, where I am, what am I doing here? And
Mhm.
it's a bit disturbing. Like this idea of, did I wake up and I have no idea where I am? And I think it's just a point to understand when someone comes through those symptoms, like it's hard. It to me, ultimately, of course, after 2 minutes, I regain. It's like, oh yeah, like, I'm here for the yoga workshop, and we're in Germany. But for
Mhm.
somebody else who wakes up in the middle of the night and that, oh, I'm not sure, yeah, going to work, it's it's quite an experience to go through.
Yeah, and it happens frequently, and it's even scarier, I think, for the person and for the family when it happens in their usual surroundings.
Yeah.
So that can, it definitely raises a big flag. Something that can also happen, for example, is that the person may have difficulties with the concept of the passage of time. So the person may only be able to discuss or address things that are happening now, like immediately. Like if you say, well, we're going to go tomorrow, the understanding of what tomorrow means, or we're going to go, or, we're leaving next week, like they may not understand the passage of time. Like, what does it really mean that it's not happening now and it's actually happening in 2 weeks? So that is something that can happen. And think about it. I mean, it can totally disrupt your daily life if you are unable to keep track of the time, and also to be able to keep track of the place where you are. So it can be, to be disoriented can be a really disabling set of symptoms.
Do you know if people are aware that that is happening to them? Because, like for example, I gave example of waking up in another country and having this moment. I don't know where I am. I don't have a reference point of not being able to relate to tomorrow and next week. And when people begin to experience that, do they have the understanding, or like I can't relate to tomorrow? It's just shifts and they're not aware of that.
At least in my experience, I think that not so much in the moment,
Mm.
but people may get more clarity at some other point, and then they may go, "Oh my gosh, I was really confused. I thought that we were in Idaho, or something like that, or I didn't even know where I was." So sometimes they can remember later on what happened, but in general, in my experience, um, not so much in the moment. And of course, we also want to be careful, because I think that the tendency for most people would be to reorient and to say, no, we're here, we're in New York, and you're at home, and sometimes that may help, but we also have to be careful that the person may not take that well, um, e- and that we need to proceed cautiously whenever we redirect somebody. Like some of the uh, tenets and things that we've spoken about time and time again here in our podcast is to enter their reality and not necessarily bring them into ours.
Which I
So,
think is even harder when it's we're speaking about the early stages, like when the family just encounters something like that. And I would assume, let's say, if I came to visit my mom and I notice, right now for me it will be different because I've been exposed to all of that with you for the past 17 years. But let's say I know nothing about this. And all of a sudden my mom is just like, oh, I'm over here. And I was like, Mom, come on. Like, we're here. We're not in this place.
hmm hmm
But also if they can't relate to tomorrow, like that's even more abstract. At least place, you can definitely see the street sign, the map, you can show the GPS. Time is way more abstract. It's like I think we take it so much for granted that I understand what is today, what is yesterday, what is tomorrow. Like I have that sense, when people begin to lose that, it's it must be super unsettling, but I don't think they can put their finger on. And then the family members may be reacting to that, like saying, "Hey, come on, don't you understand? It's already tomorrow." While the person cannot, but they also don't know that they have the disease. It's like those first signs that, like, why I think it's good to be aware that if that is happening and it maybe even irritates you as a family member, it's like, why aren't you following through? To just have a little bit of the understanding that maybe something is going on.
Absolutely. And if your loved one is experiencing some disorientation, it is time to seek some help.
So, what's number three?
So yes, number 3 is problems with planning, sequencing, or organizing. So I think the cognitive function that underlies this is executive function. And executive function, there are different areas of the brain that are responsible for it, but a big one is on the frontal part of the brain in what is called the frontal lobe. And executive function has to do with our ability to plan and to sequence. Also, our ability to make decisions and also for problem solving. So, things like reasoning are also part of executive function. And interestingly, also something called inhibitory control. So, for example, inhibitory control would be, let's say that you're driving in your car and somebody cuts you off, and all of a sudden you're going to make a unkind gesture for the towards the other driver, but you stop yourself. That's ability to be able to stop yourself um, is the inhibitory control that I am talking about. And as people progress in Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementias as well, then this ability to not react to stimuli from the environment in whatever way comes. So we call it disinhibition. It can be social disinhibition, it can be sexual disinhibition, but the bottom line is that there is a change from our ability to stop ourselves from doing things. And then with executive function problems, then you can no longer really do that.
Hmm.
So, executive function, like, we just mentioned that memory is the usual presenting sign, the top presenting sign for Alzheimer's, memory problems that disrupt daily life. But the most consequential is actually executive function. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say that you want to follow a recipe that you've known for a long time. So, there are a series of steps and events that you need to follow in order for that recipe to work appropriately. Like, you need to add the flour at a certain point and water at a certain point, and whether you're using eggs or and when is it that you're going to bake it, and whatever it is, there is an actual series of events. So there is planning and sequencing that need to happen in a particular way. If, for example, you want to get some ice cream from the from the fridge, there's also a series of events that need to happen in sequence. You gotta get off of the couch, you go into the kitchen, you get your plate, you get a spoon, you open the fridge. All those things that we so take for granted are all executive function. Also, and perhaps even more importantly, our ability to pay our bills, our ability to um, act in an emergency, our ability to problem solve, our ability to make decisions are all predicated on having a properly working executive function. It is by far the most important risk factor, and as part of my practice, I do a lot of capacity evaluations. And executive dysfunction is the most important determinant for a person's ability to make their own medical, legal, and financial decisions, much more so than having memory problems.
Hmm. So, of course, I think all of this signs, they're sort of interconnected. I assume it's not that the one
Hmm.
just came and not the other one. You probably can
Sure.
see all of them bubbling up at the same time. In the early stages of Alzheimer's disease, it may happen that the person may be sitting in the couch and think, oh, I want ice cream, but having no idea how to get to the refrigerator or that the ice cream is in the refrigerator. Like, let's say they always done it every single evening, but all of a sudden they don't know how to get it. It could happen even in the early stages.
Yes, executive function problems can be a presenting symptom. However, it is not as a common presenting symptom as memory problems. I would say that the top two presenting symptoms that I see are memory problems and language difficulties. Even though what you just said, that people may come with a plethora of different complaints, and that, sometimes these, may come, piecemeal, but sometimes they may come all at once, where people may be having some personality changes, they may be acting more disinhibited, they may be having some language difficulties, and they're definitely presenting with pretty significant memory problems that are disrupting their daily life.
And we're going to discuss language problems in just a second. But also, I would think that, and I'm just assuming, I'm not a specialist in that. Maybe at the early stages, it's more, as you mentioned, the person forgot how to pay the bills. Now, it's not that they just forgot the bills, but they get the bill and all of a sudden they think that they don't know that they need to sign the check and where to mail a check. Sort of like the sequence of steps that this requires begins to be a harder lift for them that then is before it's not even, you just take the check, sign it, put a stamp on, mail. Right now, it's a heavy lift. They're not clear on how to do that.
Most definitely. Like, for example, people may have, so these are higher cognitive tasks, right? To get your bill, to figure out the numbers, to balance your checkbook,
Hmm.
to make sure that you have enough finances to pay your bills. Um, so, you know, that is that's a big part of the problems with executive functioning, because absolutely, just like you said, you may not pay your bills because you're forgetting about your bills, and that's one thing. The other one could be because you have an executive function problems and you cannot figure out how to pay your bills.
Um,
So
and,
those are, yeah, two things and it could be both. I mean, people can be experiencing both things for sure.
and I would think that it also comes with quite a bit of unsettledness. And why I'm mentioning this, like, the movie Father comes to mind, and if you look at our channel, we have the video where we did commentary on the movie. But I think that movie presents so well what is happening.
No, totally.
The whole confusion, disorientation, paranoia that may occur, not remembering. But the part about how the person themselves feel inside of that experience. They may not think, oh, I have dementia, of course, I should ask other people for help. But I would think for some people who are used to be at a very high functioning, and now they don't know how to pay the bill, like they sit there and they don't know, to go and reach out for help may be also a huge lift. Like, I can't imagine someone who, I don't know, ran a company or just was a high functioning person. And all of a sudden they need to call someone and say, hey, I'm having trouble paying the bill. That requires, for a lot of us, even if we don't have any cognitive decline, to ask for help sometimes is hard, especially when it, points to some default in us. So I would think that it's also to be aware is just to have some compassion and empathy. If you notice that, to not just be like, what the heck? How come you still didn't pay the bill? But maybe realizing, oh, maybe something is happening, and can I approach that with more kindness?
Yeah, and you bring an important point, um, which happens with dementias, but it also happens with other, um, issues like mental illness, for example, schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. And it is something called anosognosia,
Mm.
which basically means that the person doesn't realize that they have a problem. So when you were saying that maybe the person with dementia may not have the capacity to really, take themselves to the doctor and to say, hey, I'm having these problems. Yes, some people can, and I mean, I've had patients that are self-referred. The majority of people come referred by somebody, usually a family member or a concerned neighbor, and for the majority of people, if you ask them, how is your memory? They'll say it's pretty good, you know? And then whoever is with them, the family member, the spouse, then may say, well, this is actually what's happening. And so their ability to recognize and to have some insight into their own condition is something that may be affected, and it may play a part in the person's reluctance to get help because they may not feel that there is a problem. You know, there is a book that a psychiatrist wrote regarding his brother who had schizophrenia. And it's all about this topic of the poor insight into their current condition. And the name of the book is I Don't Have a Problem. I Don't Need Any Help. And you can tell them until they're blue in the face that there is a problem, and they will not accept it. So it is definitely sometimes a big barrier for the person to get some help.
Yeah, I think it's a whole topic for another podcast,
Yes,
because I
yes,
also
it's a
think that for any family member who notices that and goes through that, it's so, so hard. Let's say, if I'm married to you, and I hope not, but if something happens and I begin to notice, my initial reaction would be like, hey, come on. Is it what happening? Because in family dynamics, we're so close to each other. And it's like your life is about to change if this life is changing. So
hmm
to also give yourself a pat on the back if whatever your communication is not perfect, and then also having the perspective that whatever your family member is going through, they may not have an insight, or if they have, they may be shutting it off before it even surfaced to the surface. So yeah, I don't have an answer for that. I just think it's hard, and it's good to be aware of that. And then with that, let's mention
agree.
the fourth one, which is poor decision making and judgment, because I think it goes right from the part that we've just discussed.
Sure. So we can talk about judgment. So let me bring up a story from my own practice. One day, I received a consult for an emergency capacity evaluation. In somebody who was living at home, basically living her life without any major concerns. And I saw this person in a skilled nursing facility after she returned from the hospital. So, what had happened to this lady was that she fell and ended up using her little device to call 911. 911 came, they picked her up, they took her to the hospital, and then her daughter went to meet her at the hospital. Once she got there, they realized that the mother didn't bring any of her credit cards and didn't have her checkbook or anything like that. So the daughter went to her home to get the checkbook. And when she got home and grabbed the checkbook, she just opened it, and she saw that her mother had made three checks for some sweepstakes company in the Bahamas for almost $1 million.
Oh,
So once I examined her, and we did an MRI, and we did a PET scan, and we did the labs, and we checked all those reversible causes of dementia that we're talking about. It turned out that she was already having some pretty significant um, dementia type of symptoms, including memory problems. But more importantly, she presented with problems basically with her decision making and perhaps a change in her, what's the word? A change in her ability to restrain herself.
mm,
So this is something that I it is not a very typical presenting symptom, but it can be very dramatic when it is. Like for example, the way that it happened with this lady. Uh, and of course, she never recovered any of that money. It was a big loss for the family. And yeah, big example of judgment problems that can come as dementia sets in.
So I think that is also a very clear difference of when the scammers may call your mom and try to get the bank account, especially
Yes.
today with AI and voice, text to voice, that someone can just write a text and make it sound like somebody. Like, I think we need to be very careful about scammers, and elderly people seem to be more trusting, or they get more scared that someone is about to get into their bank account and give them the information. But it wouldn't be the sign of a dementia. It's more that someone wrote off three checks. It's not just someone called them like a scammer once and they got, like,
Hmm.
I know a few people to whom that happened. But it's not that they sent one check and then they went, oh my gosh, what did I do? Let me reach out to
Hmm.
my family member. Like, how would you
Yeah.
differentiate that where, yeah, like someone can fall a
Well,
prey to scammers versus this is clearly
so
the your decision?
yeah, so my mom actually fell prey to that scammer, and she gave her information, and she gave her credit card number and social security number. But as soon as she hung up, she realized, oops, I made a mistake. So then she immediately called the bank. She immediately called her credit card. She, called the social security office, and she did all that. However, I have several patients that have had a multiplicity of events like this happening. Like, in other words, getting scammed over and over again.
Mm.
Like, I saw one last week where this person had been scammed by somebody saying that it was a concerned family member and that they were stranded somewhere. Please send me some money. So they sent some money. The other one was somebody reached out to them from a Facebook page and said, "Hey, I run a computer business. I can help you to clean up your computer and make it work better." And sure enough, he gave his credit card number and didn't tell anyone. So he had like three different types of scams that the person had fallen prey to in the recent past. So yeah, so this person's ability to make a decision, right? Such an example of executive function, the ability to reason. Is this really something that I should do, particularly if you've already gotten scammed?
Yeah.
But the person had no clue whatsoever that they had gotten scammed in the past and that actually they were getting scammed now. He basically had no clue. This is why executive function is so important.
Yeah, like your mom had executive function to basically, when she thought, oh, wait, something, I think I got scammed, to call her bank, to call her credit
Yes.
card, to block the things, that
And
sequencing.
it hasn't happened again.
Yeah,
She
yeah, yeah,
has
yeah.
not had any further episodes of somebody scamming her. Even though, like you said, it's getting easier and easier. And, I know that here in Florida, um, scamming elderly people is a multi-billion-dollar industry, let's say. Where unfortunately, the elderly can lose their entire life savings
Yes.
in the hands of an unscrupulous person.
At this
Yeah,
point,
it's
I
a
do want to
real.
believe in karma.
Yeah, I
Uh,
know. I've seen some pretty sad cases where the persons have lost basically everything they ever worked for.
wow, that's tough.
It's difficult. Yeah, it's
I think on
difficult.
this note, also, we will have a podcast on capacities and guardianships. We will have a
Yes,
lawyer
yeah.
as a guest where we can discuss all of this. And if you notice what to do, how you may have the capacity to not let your family member sign off $1 million as in being scammed. But that's for another podcast. Right now,
Yes.
to
Coming
conclude,
soon.
we still have number five, and number five is language.
Yes. So it just happened at number five, not because that's where it typically presents, um, but that's kind of where the chips fell. And but I would say that after memory presenting with memory problems that disrupt daily life, having language difficulties that disrupt daily life is I would say that I see them coming together so frequently. It's almost like they're like a one-two punch. You know, I would say that most of the patients that I see that are a little bit, that are in the earlier stages of the disease, come with memory problems, with orientation problems, and with language difficulties.
And what
So
specifically, like, what type of specific problems are we speaking about?
yes, so these are just some examples. And again, you will also find that a lot of these can also be like part of our daily life. Like I just hesitated a little bit on finding the right word. You know, so that is something that happens in normal life. Is something that happens as part of normal aging, and it can also be a presenting symptom for someone with Alzheimer's. So the typical presentation would be somebody saying, "Oh, what's the right word? I got it at the tip of my tongue," you know. So again, normal aging, it would be that can happen occasionally. It's not something that happens continuously or all the time, but something that happens sometimes occasionally. So word finding difficulties, that inability to find the right word is something that is a frequent initial complaint, and it happens frequently. It is more than just a occasional occurrence, but it's something that happens frequently. Another example would be like a change in the person's vocabulary. Like, I have some friends that I'm just kind of blown away by the richness of their words and the breadth of expression that they can have because their um, vocabulary is vast. So, one concerning thing would be a diminishing vocabulary, and so that the person's language becomes simpler than it was previously. So again, it is a change from the normal level of functioning to a lower level of functioning. So again, the operand word for today is change.
I
Another
remember,
thing that yes.
I remember you gave example that stood out a bit. If a person may call their watch a hand clock, which is
Yes,
the smart
exactly.
way of finding another way to express something. And I think anyone who speaks a second language, we have that for the second language. If I forget something in English, I may find the way to explain that. But again, it's my second language, it's something that I do. But if a person who always says watch and all of a sudden they call it a hand clock, clearly they have some
Yeah.
mental gymnastics to cover up forgetting the word that they usually use
Yes.
easily.
Or they may be saying, "Hey, hand me that thing over there,"
Yeah.
you know, whatever, or they may describe the action, like that thing to scoop things out
Mm.
instead of, saying, "Hey, hand me over the spoon."
So it's specifically about something like, for example, if we pause and we wait for the word to come, that is something more complex when we're trying to express. But if all of a sudden I don't know how to call the cup and it's like, oh yeah, this glass thing that holds water, that is
That's it.
definitely like, there is something is going on. It's
Yes,
not that I'm trying to
absolutely.
remember the exquisite word or I'm trying to express some thought or feeling inside of me that requires sometimes a little bit of a wait time to find. It's like I don't know how to call my phone. It's like, oh yeah, this thing that makes phone calls.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So another thing that can happen is that people can begin to have difficulties with uh, their written language, like inability to write well, making mistakes, um, incoherent sentences, and also having word salad and having also difficulties with verbalized speech. And this can lead then for the person to have difficulties with social interactions. And they may, because they may have problems following conversations. They may not feel like they are really participating. And it can result in the person becoming less social and maybe isolating more because the ability to communicate is beginning to decline.
Yeah, and which is social interactions are so, so important for our cognition,
No,
just in general, our
huge.
well being. And once we close off, uh, yeah, that's like going downhill. Um, I think also the movie Still Alice comes to mind. I think it's about
Hmm.
early onset of Alzheimer's
Hmm.
disease,
Yeah.
but I remember there's a scene where all of a sudden she doesn't remember how to say a sentence, or she stops in the middle of the sentence while she's a scientist, or I don't remember if she was a linguist, or
Hmm.
basically it
Hmm.
was never a problem for her. So it's a good movie to watch because it gives you another glimpse into how that is happening, what is happening,
Yeah.
and what to look for. Well, I think it's been the longest podcast so
And
far.
so before we hang up, so again, the operant word here is change. There has been a significant change that is affecting the person's ability to navigate through their daily life. It is a change that is actually affecting the person's ability to function. And I think that goes for everything because as hopefully as you will see that sometimes it's the symptoms may be fairly similar for normal aging and for dementia, for Alzheimer's dementia. But this concept that there's been a change over time where there's been a decline from a previously established level to a lower level um, should be a something we pay attention to.
And if you are listening to us and you reached this point in conversation, first, thank you
We
so much
appreciate you.
for being with us. And if you have any examples you've experienced, and I'm sorry if you have, but if you experience something like that in your family and those are the symptoms that you noticed, please share them. You can send us email or share them in the comments because it's good to have more examples, information, so that we empower each other in this life journey. I don't wanna even say only dementia journey. I think dementia touches almost all of us in some way or the other. So the more we know how to navigate it, the more we can still live those years. I would have to look for the word here, but maybe still cherish being alive going through those difficulties. So thank you
Yes.
again for listening, being with
Yes,
us.
indeed. And yeah, we definitely don't have all the answers, and I think that that is something that I really want to emphasize, and that we are really open to learning from you guys. We would appreciate your input.
And we'll see you in the next episode. We have new guests coming over, and we'll have more conversations with Miguel. And thank you for listening.
Take care.